Elysabeth Alfano live on Jane Unchained for another episode of Awesome Vegans. It is a treat who I have with me today, Senator Linda Holmes from the 42nd District in Illinois. I'm so thrilled. Senator, thank you for being with me.
Thank you. I'm delighted to try this.
It's wonderful to be able to do a remote interview and talk to you about basically the state of the union for Illinois when it comes to animals. So a brief introduction to you, and then I'll let you take it away. You have been in the Illinois Senate since 2006. It is very much due to you and other folks, but really primarily due to you that the state of Illinois is #1 in the nation for 11 years in a row. This is according to the Animal Legal Defense Fund because of our animal protection laws. In 2017, you passed a law to make it illegal to have performing elephants in the state of Illinois. We were the first state to do that. I remain so proud of this. Thank you for your work there. But now you have 2 bills that have passed the Senate and are headed to the House. And I think everybody in Illinois and around the nation wants to know all about those. So if you'd be kind enough to walk us through Bill 61 secondarily, but first we're going to kick off with Bill 241.
241 is something that's sort of near and dear to my heart. And once we started doing this, I think what I found so interesting was I myself had been doing this for probably 40 years, where I was very, very careful to not use products that were tested on animals. And this was something that it was not always easy to do, especially back then, because not as many companies were open about it. Literally had a little booklet that I carried in my purse that told me which companies did animal testing on their products. So when this came about, like I said, a good 30 years later, I was like, yes, this is a wonderful thing that Illinois is doing, is to prohibit the use of products that are tested on animals in Illinois. So we can no longer do animal testing, which is something we don't need to do. And it doesn't make sense to do, because when you look at it, the tests really aren't comparable to humans. When you look back in the days, they used to test products using rabbits' eyes. Rabbits, their eyes don't tear. So if you use a product to find out if it's going to be dangerous or harmful to the eyes, you're not comparing it to what our eyes tear. When you use different kinds of poisons, this was a fact I brought up in the ad committee when I brought up the bill, and everyone looked at me and asked me how I knew that. But when you test on mice and rats, rodents don't throw up. They're incapable of throwing up.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Well, it was funny after I brought it up in committee. I said, quite frankly, I don't know why I know that. So there are so many alternatives that are better that we don't need to be submitting animals to these very cruel and inhumane tests. So basically all it's doing is prohibiting animal testing.
Yes, which is wonderful. And I think, as you've said, it's not necessary. And there are so many more sophisticated ways of testing now. You know, back in the day, I personally, as an animal lover, I'm not sure I was ever behind something like this. But back in the day, perhaps one could have had a logic for it. But now, absolutely, it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. Yes. So even if you're not caring about animals, why throw your tax dollars away? These tests do not give good results. It's not indicative of what's going to happen in humans. And we should just be way beyond this as a society. So I love that Bill 241 is out there. I think Bill 241 says this would happen by 2020.
Yes, January 1st of 2020 is the date for that.
Okay, and are there any exceptions to this rule? I know California passed something similar, and then they had a little glitch with China, and so there ended up being an exception to the rule with China. Is there anything that is outstanding with this bill?
We put in language, and I'm sorry, I don't actually even recall what the exact language is, for companies like Amazon and stuff. Because in some cases, I think when it comes to the punishment phase, because in some cases they're not even knowing, they don't have the ability like a company would to know that when they're putting a product out there, if it's been tested. Amazon doesn't necessarily know that. They shouldn't be the ones liable for it.
I see. Okay. Well, great. So this bill 241 has passed the Senate, and now you guys are on break, but you're going back next week, and it's going to the House. Do I have that right?
Yes, it will be going to the House, and I'm trying to remember who is carrying it. You know what? Here, I've got my notes of who's picking it up in the House. Oh, it's State Rep Jonathan Carroll is the person who will be picking it up in the House.
And I have heard good things of him. So I expect him to carry this through to the extent that he can. What can we, as concerned citizens in the great state of Illinois, what can we do?
Well, the thing is always, and especially if for senators, contact the senators and reps in your actual district where you live, because those are always the opinions we listen to first, because obviously we're in the position we're in because people vote for us. So if you're in my district and you've got an opinion, it helps to know that you care about something I'm doing. This passed in the Senate with 53 votes. So and it was actually 53-0.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So, yeah.
That was my next question for you, is if this had broad support, and what kind of support do you expect to have in the House?
I would think it would be similar, because anybody who's going to have any objections should have brought them up to us first. So, and I have not heard from the rep yet. So if the rep is running into any pushback, of course, we've just been off for 2 weeks. We're back in Springfield next week.
On Monday. Okay. Well, still, the reason we have a democracy is so that we can all voice our opinion. So don't let democracy go to waste. You can go, I think it should be on your screen. This is all a little bit new to us today. So if you don't have it on your screen, but it should be there, you can always find out who your senator is and who your representative is by going to ILGA, so Illinois General Assembly, ilga.gov. And then there'll be a button on the right, the bottom right screen, I think it's in green, that says find your rep, and you put in your address and it'll pop out who you can contact. And I think it might even let you contact them right there through the website. I'm not sure, but go ahead and voice your opinion. And of course, voice your support for 241, that you want your rep to vote yes on 241 so that no animal testing is further allowed in the state of Illinois for cosmetics. Wonderful. Okay, so moving on to our next bill, Bill 61. Explain to me what that is and where that is in its current state.
That, again, that's a bill. We're actually increasing licensing fees for, and that's all under our Department of Agriculture that does that. It actually makes a whole bunch of little fixes and little clarifications to a lot of what we do with animals. We're changing some definitions so that they make sense of animal shelters and how we define them. And then the foster care system, which is something that very often an animal shelter will do, is instead of taking in, say, a pregnant dog and then having the dog have to wait and deliver, and then it's going to be 8 weeks until the puppies or the kittens are adopted, very often they foster them. And at that point, we had a restriction that only allowed, I think, up to 4 animals. So now what we do is we allow up to 2 litters, regardless of the size of the litter. So if somebody's fostering, they can have 2 litters of pets while they're fostering.
Right. Okay. So as I understand it, and I haven't read this with a fine-tooth comb, so you are here to correct me, but as I understand it, nothing has really been changed since about 1971 for animal shelters. And so at first glance, when I read it, I just want to say this so that other people maybe can work through this confusion. At first I thought, well, this is not a good thing that we'd be increasing the fees for licenses for shelters and foster parents, foster homes. But then I saw that it hadn't been updated since 1971, and that in fact, the state was needing some funds to continue to support animals and these organizations, and that also it's not a good thing when anyone can get a pet for almost basically free. We're talking $1971. Right. It's ridiculously low. And then they can discard, they're just not taking on or understanding the responsibility of having a companion animal. So I think it's actually quite good to get the fees and structures up to contemporary times.
And we also wanted to clarify it where each individual foster home doesn't have to be licensed. You don't have to be paying a license fee, because very often those are volunteers. So you don't want to be doing that to them.
That's right. So some fees went up in terms of adopting an animal, I think, and then some fees went down, and that is the fees for foster homes.
It just makes more sense to do it that way, yes.
Okay, wonderful. So what support did you have for that in the Senate, and what do you expect in the House?
I would expect It took us a while in the Senate simply because by the time we got through with it, I think we added about 4 different amendments to make sure we addressed everybody's concerns.
Oh, great.
And I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. It passed. I'm pretty sure this passed pretty unanimously too.
Well, I know it had the support of, correct me if I'm wrong, Best Friends for Animals and the Illinois chapter of the Humane Society of the United States. So it had some big thinkers behind it who agreed with and gave input, I believe, into Bill 61.
And I would love to give a shout out because I will tell you in all the animal legislation I do it with the Humane Society, works very closely with me. And Leedy Van Cavage of Best Friends, she's an attorney for Best Friends, has been the person who sits there at every negotiation and works out all the details. I could not imagine doing this without her support. She's been the best thing that has happened for animals in Illinois. That's
wonderful. Next to you. Yes, the two of you together. Well, I actually got a little birdie in my ear from the National Anti-Vivisection Society, Marcia Kramer. And then I agree with you about the Humane Society. I've had Josh Balk, who is Vice President of Farm Animals nationally for the Humane Society. He's been on this show, Awesome Vegan. So he's a wonderful, wonderful person.
Yeah, we've had a lot of great support. Now, I know it is going to the House now, and I know the House is going to have it come up in their executive committee. So, and I'm thinking that's going to happen fairly soon. That should happen within the first 2 weeks we're back in Springfield.
And is it the same situation? You really haven't had any pushback on this, so you expect it to fly through as it should? Well,
it's because we did the work on it in the Senate. It was a lot of work. Like I said, we're up to, I think, 4 amendments on it. So we did an awful lot.
Okay, so you feel that you've addressed everything that could come up. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I'll just say again, if you would like to voice your support for Bill 61, go to ilga.gov. Of course, what's the point of living in democracy if you can't make your voice heard? So go right ahead. It's a pretty simple and self-explanatory website. So go right ahead and find your rep, your senator, and your rep. Okay, so 2 very important bills that you've been getting through the Senate. Thank you for that. But let's talk about the general state of affairs for animals in the state of Illinois. Across the nation, there has been a push for a fur ban, and I wonder if we're going to be seeing that in Illinois.
Nobody has brought that up to me, so it will be interesting to see that come up. Because I've done so much animal legislation, I have to admit that very often I'm the person that it comes through. So I may be seeing it. We did have a piece of legislation that we weren't unable to do this year that I'm hoping to sort of work out some of the glitches and get worked on, because this one was a little frustrating. And I spent last summer working with Lincoln Park Zoo, Brookfield Zoo, and Shedd Aquarium. And we wanted to take that elephant bill and we wanted to expand the list of species.
I was going to ask you about that.
That one, the real pushback, and we pulled some animals out of there because I understand some of their difficulties. And a lot of times it was actually the county fairs that were our biggest pushbacks. And that's the problem, because I believe there are some county fairs that like to have tigers come in. Well, exactly. It is a horrible environment for a tiger. Very often they live on preserves in some place like Florida. So where they live, they may be addressing their needs and taking the appropriate care of them. But once you put them in a vehicle and you bring them out, what do you do with them? It's not like many other animals where you can ship them to where you want them to be displayed and then set them free and let them exercise and do what they need to do. You're not going to do that with a tiger. So this poor animal is going to be in this confined setting.
Committed to jail for life.
Yes, and it's dangerous for people.
I was just going to say it's a safety hazard for people, so it makes no sense. And people were pushing back for tigers. Now, maybe I'm just being idealistic. Is it possible to get a ban on all wild animals in performing traveling shows?
That was kind of our push, what we were really trying to do. But we had some we were more concerned about than others, being the bears are another one that people like to travel with. All of the big cats, so tigers and lions and those, we wanted to make sure we're not primates. People don't understand how terrible it is on a primate to be in that very, very stressful situation.
And basically isolated. And they're very community oriented. So the isolation is so mentally intolerable.
I mean, look at the way zoos have changed over the years. I was a Brookfield Zoo docent, and when you look at what they do in zoos, the enrichment, remember when it used to be you went to a zoo and there was, say, a tiger or a lion in a bear cage pacing back and forth because it was so highly stressed, and that was what it did. Now you go to the zoo and very often you're seeing those. I mean, you take Brookfield, for example, and you sometimes have to peek around it, and maybe you don't even see them because guess what? They're set up so the animal doesn't have to be on display. They do things to make it beneficial for both. Say at Brookfield, you go to one where there's a viewing window, and there's usually a lion laying on a big rock right in front of that window. Now, the reason is that rock is heated, and we know cats like heat. So that's, so they lay on that rock. So that gives people the ability to see that animal, but it's also providing the necessary environment for the animal not to be stressed out.
Well, this sort of segues me to my next point, because I am no fan of zoos, pretty much simple and straight out there. But I realize that it takes steps to get where personally I would like to go, taking this opportunity in our democracy to voice my opinion here. So I like that we have seen some steps in some zoos, not fast enough or not all enough for me, but across the country. And this kind of leads me as a segue to California passed Prop 12, which was, personally, I'm vegan. And so I always think like, oh gosh, can't wait till we get animals out of the food supply system. But until we get there, that stepping stone effect again, you see states like California passing Prop 12, which is going to do away with gestation crates and give more room, et cetera, in a factory farm situation. Again, personally, I'm not for factory farms, but at least we have stepping stones. Do you see anything like that coming through in Illinois?
There have been conversations with factory farms and stuff, but very often some of those discussions have been going after, there's always a few bad actors and some who really do it as humanely as possible. I mean, let's face it, it still is killing an animal to consume it ultimately, but it's those conditions while that animal is being raised, that it needs to be well provided for.
Well, again, we live in a democracy. One of the beauties is that we can voice how we feel. And of course, the average American is so busy, most likely they're working 2 jobs, they have 2 kids. I mean, if they get 10 seconds to themselves, I'd be surprised. And so not everyone has a lot of time to think about it. But when given the chance, when people are allowed to vote in an election, if they should better the standards for factory farm animals, they always do. It always passes. I don't think people like to see cruelty to animals. It's not something that anyone wants to feel that they're a part of, that they're in that system of being cruel to animals, because most people on their own volition would choose not to be. And when they have the opportunity, they do vote for change, for bettering the life standard of factory farm animals. So I think if someone like yourself can get it to the ballot, people will vote for it.
Well, and that brings up the other thing when I go back to my species, having them not in the traveling atmosphere, is things like the county fair. I'm like, you don't need tigers at a county fair. And there are county fairs that actually understand that you turn off people. I personally would not go to a county fair that has tigers because I think it's a cruel practice and I'm not going to support that. Now, I will go to a county fair that has, guess what? Steers and pigs and turkeys and rabbits and the things that you are expected to see at a county fair, the animals that are raised on a farm.
So, you bring up a very interesting point, I think, from a tourism standpoint. Here you're talking about it from visiting a county fair, but the same thing I think applies to a city like Chicago. A lot of people are turned off, for example, when they see horse carriages in a busy intersection street like Michigan Avenue, where we as passengers can barely navigate in our cars or on the street. And then to add animals to that enormous confusion only says, when is the next lawsuit going to happen for an accident? I mean, it's just so accident prone, so not safe, so not making sense. And as we try to progress and all be technologically advanced, who doesn't want Google to set up in their hometown? Who doesn't want Amazon to be in their, city? So as we try to be these advanced societies, and then to have this old-fashioned notion of, I'll just use the example, as I said before, horses in the middle of a major intersection, I think it turns people off and it makes us look old-fashioned and not in a good light. And I think the same is true when you see, as you said, these traveling shows with animals.
I think you're exactly right. I have been to one circus in my life and was horrified by it. Horrified. I mean, that literally is, I will never go to the circus. Now, if you want to go to the circus and see acrobats and stuff, hey, you know what? That's great. We do not need to see animals doing tricks and trying to be taught things that an animal was never supposed to be doing, and what they do to that animal in order to get it to perform the way they want to perform it. So
they torture them. I had this discussion yesterday with somebody on Facebook. Yes, when you use animals for entertainment, wild animals. We're not talking about your dog that you've taught to play catch. Wild animals in entertainment, the only way to do that is to starve and beat them. It's horrible conditions. And then, of course, take them out of their communities, societies, with their families, their societal structures. And it's a life of jail. It's a jail sentence for something innocent who did nothing. So it's, but we're changing that. We're changing that one law at a time. And Illinois still is the top rated state for animal protection laws, and a lot of that is due to you. I really appreciate all that you do, Linda. One last question, or actually a couple of super quick questions before we go, but one last question from the legal standpoint. What would you like to see Illinois residents doing? What can we do to help animals in Illinois?
Again, I would say just be involved and be aware and speak up. Again, reach out to your legislators. You have states, every citizen's got one state rep and one senator who represents them. Don't be shy about reaching out and saying what's important to you.
I like that. Okay, so at the end of every interview that I do here on Awesome Vegans on Jane Unchained, I ask a couple of super fast questions just to get a sense for you, your personality, how you run your life. So these are all meant to be sort of off the cuff, one-word answers. Some maybe take a little longer, but okay, here we go. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Probably that I think what all of us want to know is, you know what, the world doesn't revolve around us. We tend to think of ourselves first and always put ourselves in the context of everything, and understand there's a much broader context out there.
Yeah, okay, I like it. So think of others and how we are all connected in this world. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and what's the impact we're going to leave in this world? I think everybody should look at that. If you strive to say, my being here made the world better for someone else, then we've done something right.
I feel that way about animals. I hope that I am making the world a better place for animals. Okay. What is your favorite phrase that you live by? So let's say you've had a really tough day in the Senate and you come home and you sort of have to give yourself a little miniature pep talk. What do you say to yourself? I'll give you an example. I like to say, nose to the grindstone, eyes to the sky. Maybe after a really bad day, this will pass. Tomorrow's a brighter day. I don't know. I tend to be an optimist. So if you have a really bad day, for some reason, you wake up the next morning and it's a whole new day. I think every day is a fresh start. Okay. I love that. Clean slate every day.
Yeah.
And the last question for you is, what are your predictions for the future? I know it's a very vague question. The future could be tomorrow. It could be 10 years from now. It could be your life. It could be about animals. Where do you see us going?
I mean, I don't know. Politically, we're in a bit of a tough time. I think I think most people that are animal lovers look at this directly. My biggest concern is the environmental concerns, the warming of our climate, and the people who don't believe in climate change. And it's like, you cannot fix something if you refuse to even recognize it. So I think that's my biggest fear. And I'm hoping we wake up to it. And I think we have to. Let's look at the changes that are happening with our climate, the severity of the storms and the tornadoes and all of this happening, to not realize that we are having an impact on that. And if we're not careful, we're going to get to a point where we can't turn it back.
Yeah, I'll add to that, not just the severity, but the frequency. So, it used to be, and I'm just rounding out here, I don't know the exact number, but it used to be a hurricane would come to the East Coast every 3-5 years. Now it's 2 or 3 a season. You used to have fires in California, and it used to be sort of 1 or 2 or 3 in 1 or 2 months. Now it's like the season is like 6 years of fires, and they're all over the state. The flooding that's gone on in the Midwest alone, now we're back to sort of factory farm animals and their living conditions. How many animals were literally locked in those factories and left to drown? only to be reflooded again next year. It's not like these things aren't coming with a lot of frequency. So,
and 100-year floods are happening all the time. And it's like there were called 100-year floods for a reason. But yes, now they've become commonplace.
Yes, yes. This is why, so right now we're doing this remotely, but I'll leave on this note. I would love to cook for you and show you all the ways to get great protein. I'm sure you know about them already.
I'm a huge salad eater, so
there you go. There you go, because I think it's tricky to have the environmental conversation, and so many things are key there, right? Our transportation and so many things are key. But factory farming is part of that equation. So as we look at the environment and climate change, I think it's hard to have the conversation without that, or we do ourselves an enormous disservice if we do. So, but conversation for another time. I know today we're trying to get 241 passed and Bill 61 passed. And again, you have been very instrumental in being out in front and leading for animals. So I hope you'll come back on this show. I know there's so much to talk about, and I hope that you'll be making headway after 241 and 61 with those circus animals. Thank you for keeping an eye out there. Everyone, shout out to Senator Linda Holmes, and don't be shy to contact your own senator. Did I say Governor Linda Holmes? I hope it did.
Linda Holmes is not at all interested in becoming governor. I would like to stay as a state senator. Thank you.
I got that right. Yeah, I thought I heard that shout out of my mouth. Yes. So shout out to Senator Linda Holmes. And of course, you can reach your senator or representative by going to ilga.gov. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope everything is very successful next time you are back in Springfield.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to do this with you.
Great. And we got the technology down. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.